Hey folks, David Stewart here. Thought I'd take a minute and, as per a viewer suggestion, talk about some little drama surrounding Terry Goodkind, a very famous fantasy writer. And he went on Facebook and made a Facebook post basically slamming his cover artist and calling the cover for his new book really, really bad. And I think it's an interesting talking point, not just because of Terry Goodkind's behavior and his attitude towards book covers, but also because it's a great sort of leaping off point to talk about what I think goes into good book cover design, and especially fantasy book cover design, since I write in the fantasy genre. So let's take a quick look at this particular book cover. Here it is, Shroud of Eternity. This is the book cover Terry Goodkind thought was bad. In fact, as we zoom into it and look at it in more detail, let's read what he said about it. Shroud of Eternity is a great book with a very bad cover. Laughably bad. So let's have some fun with it. Tell us what you think of the cover in my next post, the poll above, and we'll pick 10 random entries to win a signed copy of the hardcover. We'll pick the 10 winners on March 1st. So if you're watching this right now, you could actually win this book from Terry, I guess. Everyone's welcome to play. Just cast your vote and post a comment. I might actually want a signed copy because I actually like this cover, and I think it's a great example of good cover design. And maybe we could try to figure out why Terry thinks it's bad cover design. But first of all, let me tell you why I think it's actually a really good cover. First of all, if you imagine you're an aspiring fantasy writer and you are hoping to get a book published and someone says, here's the cover of your new book, and it comes out looking like this, I think most people would be really ecstatic. They'd be like, oh, it's a great piece of art. It's highly detailed. It's got great fantasy elements. Oh man, it looks so professional. Everything about it looks good. Why doesn't Terry Goodkind like it? Well, here's the good parts about it. So first of all, the image is, I think, a great fantasy image. You have a fantastical looking person standing in the back. You've got a very attractive female. She's holding a sword, which is basically a fantasy element or a medieval fantasy element. And her armor's rather fantastical, and she's attractive. You have another guy with a sword. So you have three people with swords. You're starting to look at fantasy. You have a big castle in the background. I might have actually had Terry Goodkind's name be quite a bit smaller to show this castle, because this is a good fantasy element. But Terry Goodkind is the brand, so you kind of want that to be big. And then you have fantasy font, so the font can actually communicate the genre as well. And then you have some weird looking statue guys. So everything on this cover communicates fantasy, and it not just communicates fantasy, but it communicates something about fantasy. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in this story. What do these statues mean? This is unique. This is an example of a cover that might have some elements from the story that is really going to make a reader want to pick up the book and read what's going on in there. So we have some unique elements and we have some traditional elements. The Photoshop work is very good. If you guys want me to do videos on how to do this kind of lettering in Photoshop, I can do that for you. It's actually pretty easy to do this kind of stuff, as well as joining the letters. And you can do this in a couple of different programs to get this kind of look. And what sort of fonts you can use for fantasy. Every genre tends to have a number of fonts that end up being associated with it. Right now, this is Stencil. Let me show this to you a little bit bigger. This is the third Needle Ash book, and I did design this cover. It's a photocomp cover, but this font is called Stencil Decorative. It's very, very cliche fantasy, but you want to nail your genre with the cover. That's the first job of a cover, is to really nail what's going on in the genre. And in fact, I think this does this. So why doesn't Terry Goodkind like it? And attached to this, and I'll link the Reddit thread for you guys. I almost never link Reddit, but I'll link it because it's got some good discussions, and it's also got a link to an interview with Terry Goodkind where he talks about this kind of stuff. Terry Goodkind doesn't like genre covers. Here's the cover of the sort of Truth series, and there's a couple things you may notice about it. First of all, it's got the same sort of boring design with a small image, rather than this big, gorgeous image taking up the entire cover. You have a shrunk image. He doesn't like things that communicate fantasy because he's like, my readers aren't fantasy readers. And that might be true, but I don't know if that's actually true. The covers that he actually likes of all of these are only the last three. And if you have any kind of experience looking at book covers on Amazon or anything like that, these kinds of book covers are the kind of book covers you might expect, like self-published authors to design themselves. Not in that they're really bad, but they're incredibly simple and don't really communicate anything. Another thing you'll notice about these is that there's no branding on the series. It doesn't say part whatever of the Sword of Truth, the way that this says, Needle Ash, Book 3, Shadows Rise. The branding of the series is bigger than the name of the book, and that's kind of how I wanted it for this little ditty here. So there's no branding on that, and that to me actually kind of indicates not really an understanding of his market, and maybe intending to deceive people a little bit, because if you saw one of these covers at like the airport, you might pick it up and read it and be completely lost after the first 100 pages because it's like book 5 in his series. I've read the first book in this series and it was kind of okay, very gardeny, meaning like it just kind of flops around in its plot and does a lot of weird stuff, and the internal consistency of the rule set, there's no rule set. We'll just go with that way. There's no rule set, and things happen. So I didn't really care too much to read the other books in the series. They might be good if you like them. That's okay. I'm not gonna say they're good or bad. They're just not really for me. But that's kind of Terry Goodkind's attitude towards it. Is that a good attitude? Well, I don't think that's a good attitude. I think you want to inform the reader of what's there. The first role of a book cover is to sell your book cover, to sell the book. It's an advertisement for the book, and so you want to inform the reader that they're going to read a fantasy book. And if you're not writing a fantasy book and you have a fantasy cover, that's going to make the reader upset. And if you don't have a fantasy book, if you have a fantasy book and it doesn't have a fantasy book cover, you might also be upsetting a reader. But when I look at the bottom 3 here, these look like covers that I wouldn't expect to sell well at all. And chances are, if they did sell well, it was because you're in whatever 1, 2, 3. You're like in book. This is a prequel up here, but you're in like book 7, 8, 9 of a series. The readership is established, and the cover doesn't matter nearly as much as it matters for your first, second, or third, or an independent work like a standalone book. So that's my whole spiel with that. The lettering is good. Everything about it's good. The only thing I would change about this cover, not the image at all. The image is great. I love the image. You have an attractive blonde with a sword. That's going to make people want to pick up the book and see what's in it. You have some weird looking statues. That's something that people haven't seen before on the cover. I would shrink Terry Goodkind's name because it blocks off this castle, which is an important fantasy element, or switch where things are at. And that's probably what I would end up doing to change the cover. But I'm sure someone along the way is like, it's Terry Goodkind's got to be really huge because that is the brand. Terry Goodkind is the brand, not Shroud of Eternity. And this, I don't even know if this is part of the Sword of Truth series, but he always avoids putting the series on the cover, which is usually not the best idea. And if you're an author and you're trying to sell something on Amazon, if someone comes across part 3 of a book, if they're on Amazon, they're going to be like, well, I wonder what part 1 is. So if they come across part 3 and they like the cover for part 3, that's only more advertisement for the entire series. You want it to be clear that it's part of some book series, because even if they come to it out of order on the digital marketplace, they're going to end up finding that book 1 and maybe giving the series a shot. So that's my spiel. I would not hesitate to work with this particular cover artist. I think he did a great job. And this kind of behavior, though, is definitely unprofessional. Just a little advice for guys. He might have done this to upset his publisher. He might have been upset that his publisher picked this artist. If you're an author and you haven't taken the time to study marketing, book marketing, or cover design in depth, you don't want to be the guy who's slamming your book cover artist, because the whole point of going with a traditional publisher is so that you don't have to do that stuff. So you're like, here's the manuscript, and they're like, we'll copy edit it, we'll typeset it, we'll we will pick the cover artist, we will market it, you just write the book. That's like the selling point of traditional publication. So you don't want to be the guy who's like second guessing the people who it's their business to sell as many books as possible, for, you know, trying to compile it into a very sellable package. And this to me is a very sellable package. In fact, if I were to hand this to someone, they'd be like, oh, this looks like a cool fantasy novel. I've never heard of Terry Goodkind, but I might want to read it, you know. So this is definitely don't want to be that guy unless you've done your homework, because when you look at these last 3 book covers, this is the kind of stuff I could show you guys how to do these book covers if you want. They'd be actually probably really easy to do. I'm looking at them, and they wouldn't be that hard. I've done, you know, I did a replicate Name of the Wind book cover once video, so I could do something else for that if you guys want to know how to do that. But I would actually recommend a much more complex cover than this if you're going to try to do one yourself. A photocomp cover I think is going to work better. This is actually, there's people are like, oh, who did your art? I'm like, I did the art. It's not really art. It's just a bunch of photographs that I copy pasted and stuck together in Photoshop, and I can show you guys how to do that if you want. It's a good skill to learn if you're an indie author, at least for the, you know, for the foreseeable future, unless you want to be paying somebody to do your book covers, which is also a good idea. And if you do pay someone to do book covers and their experience with it, you should probably pay them for their expertise as well as the final product. So tell me what you think about Terry Goodkind's behavior. I think it was pretty out of line. I wouldn't insult the book cover artist even if I was upset with my publisher. And I certainly wouldn't want to alienate my publisher when they're basically doing everything for you. They're probably selling the book in spite of you with a cover like this. That it's like, dude, we're not going to sell any books with dumb covers. So let's put a cool cover on it, and maybe you'll actually sell some more books. And we'll desperately try to make you succeed, even though you're trying to make yourself fail. That's kind of how I would take away from slamming a book cover like this. Is like, I guess you want your book. I guess you don't want people to pick the book up off the shelf anywhere. Okay, or see it on Amazon and want to click on it. So anyway, that's what I think about that. I hope you guys will have a great day. And of course, you can check out my books at dvspress.com or find them on Amazon. The Needle Ash series, which is my sort of newest little project. And I did that as part of a 30-day rapid release project. Muramasa Blood Drinker, 2nd edition, will be coming out very shortly. This is what the 2nd edition cover looks like. This will be the cover if you buy it right now, although the interior is getting a couple of little changes. So you can check those out. And of course, Water of Awakening, my high fantasy novel from last year. And I hope you guys will have a great day. I'll see you next time.